Our next speaker is a user experience strategist at Blend Interactive, where he handles content strategy and information architecture. He also leads Sioux Falls Content and Design Meetup group and writes at length about methodology, empathy, and small business content strategy at Eating Elephant. Please welcome Corey Vilhauer.
So I put together, a big set of tools and resources and things that I jump into, and I refer to them over and over again before any talk, sort of as a crutch. Things that I'm going to. Here's a idea. Here's something I need to remember. Make sure you bring water on stage. Make sure that you've gone through your slides. Make sure you practice, so that I don't stand up here and say, "I'm sorry, I must be the worst speaker you've ever seen." So let's talk about web content. I bring this up because when a site is launched or when we're working on a new initiative or something along those lines, we run into those same fears. We jump in and we're like, oh gosh, I hope this really works out. When I stand on stage, I worry that I don't have everything down. And when you launch a new website, you worry that not everything is set up correctly. And it's situations like this where we meet with clients and we ask them, how is this going? Are you going to be able to handle this website once it launches? What can we help with? And they have all of these problems, and they say, man, I don't think we're going to be able to do this because we don't have enough staffing, or I don't think we're going to be able to do this because I'm not sure that the CEO is on board with it. And then they say, without fail, I'm sorry, we must be the worst team you've ever worked with. And no one has ever been the worst team that I've ever worked with. It's okay to feel this way. There's nothing wrong with going into the situation and saying, I'm not sure that we can do this, unless you don't do anything about it. And that's why I want to talk, and I get really, really interested in this idea of developing a methodology. Who here can say with confidence that your company has some sort of methodology for the web? Okay, this is the first time no one's ever raised their hand when I asked that question. Who can say with confidence that you know what we're talking about in terms of methodology? A few, okay. Well, when we talk about methodology, what we're talking about, and this is the actual academic definition of it, is a formal documentation of a set of processes. This is what we do, writing down what we do so that others understand what we do. It's actually communicating the steps that we're going to go through once a site goes live, for instance. And we all have methodologies in our lives already, regardless of whether or not we identify them as that. My public speaking preparation is a methodology. It's what I do to make sure I don't end up in the middle of this stage in a ball, sobbing uncontrollably. My wife will attest to the fact that I have a methodology for cleaning the kitchen. I think it's perfect. I'm really good at this. My methodology doesn't necessarily translate all the time, but the dishes usually get cleaned, so, You may have a methodology for packing for travel. You may have one of those things where you roll up your shirts, and then you make sure the shoes are in the right bag, and you wear slip-on shoes when you go to the airport. Maybe you have, and I used to before I stopped using iTunes, but I had a methodology for organizing my iTunes. I knew which folders things went in and how to tag things, and it was incredibly horrible. We're all very familiar with one major methodology, and that's scientific method. We all learned this in 5th grade, probably. And scientific method is what scientists use to do science. When you are conducting experiments, you have to have some sort of set method for doing that. And a scientific method, for those who don't remember or who didn't go to 5th grade, ask a question, research a problem, form a hypothesis, what do I think is going to happen, test the hypothesis, and then either communicate your findings or change your hypothesis if things just weren't working out. The reason that the scientific method is a thing is because it allows for replication. Otherwise, I could look at a little pile of dirt and say, this looks very nutrient rich. And somebody else could come in and say, why? And I'd say, oh, just because. This looks like there's nutrients in that. I think it's probably good. And that scientist would say, well, that's not science. You haven't tested that. You haven't done anything with that. I don't know why, I don't know how I can trust whatever your finding is, because I don't know how you got to that finding. And so methodologies allow for that replication. It allows you to be able to, better understand how somebody is getting to their final solution or to their final goals. But it's worth remembering that even within scientific method, there are slight differences. Scientific method is just really those 5 steps. But how you interpret those 5 steps differs from science to science. Scientific method for biology is very different from scientific method for sociology. The 5 steps are the same, but the details within those steps are completely different. Methodologies vary. There's no such thing as one perfect methodology. It will never happen. And the reason is that each company is different. If we're building a methodology, another company isn't going to be able to use that with 100% results because they have different people. Each initiative is different. Each project is different. Each one of us is different. Friends, you, me, the person next to you, we are the most beautiful, interesting, and unique snowflakes. All of you. So if that's the case, then why does this matter? If a methodology really only works for you, then why go through what seems like just busy work? Why are we going to go and document our methodology? Who cares? Well, I'm going to tell you. Methodologies matter because no matter what, we hear these same things every time. We don't really have a process for getting articles approved. Actually, you do have a process. You just don't know what it is. Nobody knows what it is in this case. The process may be there's one person who presses publish, and that's all the process is. Or there is a more detailed process. It just hasn't been communicated to you. I apologize to everybody who works with the university. I always pick on universities because they're ripe for picking on. We send things to university relations, but we're never really sure when they're finally published. The reason this happens is because there isn't any communication between departments. Nobody knows what the other departments are trying to do. Nobody understands what the final goals are. Nobody understands what those steps are. And that's understandable. When you have a lot of people, you have to have a higher level of communication. Or there's always this client, and this happens all the time. There's a client who, when you ask them, "Hey, what's your workflow? What's your content workflow?" and they just, sort of kind of laugh. Methodologies are very helpful for 3 major reasons. And the first one is that it helps communicate our process. This is a very old cookbook. This was my great-grandmother's Watkins cookbook from the 19-somethings. The 19-somethings were the somethings is the small number, not the large number. This was her, in a sense, her methodology for cooking. All of these recipes in here, they're not just recipes. They have been scribbled on. They have been changed. They have been adapted. Every time she cooked something and it messed up, she made a note. Here's what I need to change next time. They lived in a high altitude, so she had to make allowances for high altitude cooking. And what's shown here is actually my granddad Wilson's salve. And it has things, it has a 1.5 lard, a walnut-sized piece of rossum, and mutton taller. I don't even know. I can't even read it. But the idea is that this recipe has been saved. It's been passed on. It's become part of that cooking methodology in some sense. The second reason is that we need to somehow standardize our path so that we're not recreating things every time we come into a new process. Whether that is developing workflow, whether that is auditing content, whether that is determining what the next initiative, coming up with new landing pages, there needs to be some process, and it has to be standardized. The reason being that somebody's already done this work probably already for us. And if it's new, we know there's somebody who's coming up later who's going to do that work. Wouldn't it be really helpful if we had a way to actually, tell them what we did? Now, I don't want to get too hung up on the standardizing part of it, because we're not standardizing the exact steps. We're just standardizing the idea, the general structure. And this comes to the third point. When you have communication and you have standardization, what you can do is you can then allow for thoughtful variances. Fun fact, this was where the typo was, and I found it. As a result of being able to communicate what we do, and as a result of having a standardized path, we now can vary from that path because we understand what would happen. We can't break rules until we've actually made the rules in the first place. So let's make some rules. How do we begin developing a methodology within our organization? Well, in terms of that first breath of a methodology, we're going to try to put this into life. Usually what ends up happening is you go out and you buy a book. And then you say, you know what, content strategy for the web, that's my methodology. That's what we're going to do. But, and I do this at risk of angering both of our keynote speakers, these aren't methodologies for you. When Christina and Melissa wrote Content Strategy for the Web, that was their methodology. That was their process. That's what they do, and that's what happens in their companies. You can take a little bit of that, but you can't just go word for word. And both of these books will say so. These are not methodologies, these are guides. And they're very important for that. But if you just buy one of these books and say, you know what, I'm going to do everything from here, I guarantee the authors will say, that's not what it was intended for. It was intended to help you find your own way. When we develop a methodology, we're not looking for an exact map. This is, and I have to make sure I get this right, this illustration is from the Draftman's Handbook of Plan and Map Making, which is written by George G. Andre in 1891. It's a map of nothing showing everything. It's a guide that shows you generally, if you're making a map, here are some of the things that might be in it. Here's how you will connect some of these pieces. You can't use this as a map because it isn't a map of anything, but at least you can use it to help make a map. In creating methodologies, we do this. The idea is to develop a guide that will help us understand what steps we want to take. That helps us from, getting too caught up in exact steps to try to replicate exactly what we did last time, and instead really focuses on that end goal. The other thing is that, you know what, I can't stand up here and tell you what to do. No one knows the intricacies and the intimate, messy details of your company better than you do. I can give you some tips as to, here's maybe what you might want to do, but ultimately it's going to come down to your organization determining this is what I need to do. This is how we're going to handle a content audit. This is what our process is going to be when we decide to post a new landing page. So experts and consultants and best practices, they all help, but you have to find that real path on your own. And there are some ways that you can sort of start to put together that methodology. First of all, always be collecting. Always be using what is around you to build a better process. Working on the web is not unlike being a master builder from the Lego movie. How many people were in my workshop yesterday? You understand, the people who raised their hand understand that I have one mission in life right now. And that mission is to get everybody to see the Lego movie by the end of this weekend. How many people have seen the Lego movie? It's a criminally small amount. This movie is so funny, and it's, okay. Master Builders, for those who don't know, are an advanced group of Lego characters who are able to take all of the things around them and build something out of it without instruction. They have a rough idea of what they want, but they just take what they have around them and they piece something together, and that's what we do when we're developing processes. We have to find some place to start, of course, and that's where I get to take the red X's off these books, because this is where these come in handy. Any content strategy book like this, any book about the industry, is a fantastic place to start. You read these books, you follow blogs, you talk to really interesting people, you talk to not interesting people, you meet with other companies, you ask them how they do things, you go to meetups, things like this. And you start to learn a little bit more about what the landscape is, and you start to learn a little bit more about other people's processes. And then you take everything you've learned and you start making a list, which seems really simple. But what this does is twofold. Number one, it helps you understand the scope of what it is you're trying to do. In a perfect world, what tasks would we do to reach our goals? Would we do a content audit? Is that necessary for us? And second, this list of processes will help you understand where your weaknesses are. You may have a real need for an editorial workflow, but maybe you don't have anybody who can actually maintain that workflow. If you wouldn't have ever thought about it, if you never would have thought about developing any sort of methodology and saying this is what we're going to do and it's documented for everyone, you may never have known that you didn't have anybody who can't handle a workflow. And then with that list, we can start to flesh it out. We need to know not just what we're going to do, but how we're going to do it and why we're going to do it. How do we post news? Well, we meet with departments. We sit in on product planning. We post news to the website as needed. Why do we post news? Well, we post news to fulfill our goal of a more educated and informed user base. Or we post news to show potential customers how active and forward-thinking we are. Those are actual outcomes that we came up with at one point, I'm sure, in this fictional company I just made up. And then we need to bring everybody together and confirm that, yes, this is what's going to work. One person building a methodology is a methodology that's probably going to fail, because there are lots of different pieces. There are a lot of people who are going to be involved in that overall plan. Bring people together. What can we do with the given time and budget? What can we actually handle? What's most important for our site goals? Do we focus on landing pages? Do we focus on content audits? Do we focus on some other thing? And if there's something that isn't a big focus, is that something we want to save for later? Do we want to maybe take on handling landing pages later on when we have an intern who can help us populate them? The sad news is that no matter what, you're going to get to the end. You're going to say, I think we have it. I think we know. This is our process. This is how we do things. We're going to post this on a wiki, or we're going to post this on the internet, and everyone's going to do this. And it's never going to be finished, and you're always going to have to change it. Because people change, because your business will change, because your company will change. People will come, people will go. You'll learn new skills. You will lose people who had skills you needed. So it's a constant iteration, and I love this quote from Robin Sloan. Instead of driving an idea blindly into the world, you are guided by the feedback you get. There are no beginnings or endings, just small steps forward. Methodologies allow for communication between projects. They allow for communication between people. They allow for replication from one project to the other. And they allow for us to change based on what worked, based on what didn't work. Most of all, they allow for our companies to adapt and to not be scared when something new comes up. It gives us a path to follow. They bring people together toward common goals. And without methodology, there'd be no way that I could stand up here today and talk to this crowd. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.